Welcome to episode 3 of Explain the Crazy World Timeline. This episode, issue 8, released in, September 1945, October 1945, November 1934. It's at November 1934. September 1934. October 1934. November 1934. December of 1934. Okay. So this is a sequel to obviously the 5th issue. And this is the second time that Terraformer actually appeared. You don't know, Terraformer is the usual enemy that Mr. Calvin faced against. And, of course, it's also the return of Mr. Calvin and Korath himself. This also introduced Bryla, another new guy I finally had planned. Well, not new, but new-ish, where I finally had planned her. Anyways, if you don't know what is the difference between this original Bryla and the one I'm doing now, and you will wait and see. Anyways, how would I plan the sequel? Well, how would I plan Bryla? Well, I think, many inspirations of... I had many inspirations for the character, but again, you have to wait and see. Anyways, that was issue 8 of Crazy World Explain Timeline, episode 3.
Go.
If you don't know, my inspiration for Terraformer would be his costume that he wears to pretend that he's Clean Man, which was inspiration for the Terminator, and him being a form of fear, which is obviously inspiration for Scarecrow. Anyways, the Terraformer actually is the most intelligent Crazy World bad guy. I mean, he knew how to find a place. He knows how to find many places ruined. He even known several times how to other plans. You know his plan most of the time fails. There are times where he tries to succeed, but still fails in the process. Anyways, Terraformer is obviously the first bad guy in the timeline. In fact, he's the very first Mr. Calvin villain ever. He first appeared in the same first appearance as Mr. Calvin himself. Crazy World number 1, May of 1934. He has returned many, many times, appearing in almost every Mr. comic, almost appearing in every Crazy World comic in general. In the classic era, Terraformer was just known as the Robot Beast, originally just playing on new ideas for what would be his next move. Because that the classic era was taking place in the 1930s through the early 60s. And back then, villains planning their next move was just the thing that villains do. Nowadays, Terraformer has any plans he wants. And at times, he actually change the reasoning and how he gets to Mr. Calvin. That changed in the Advance era back in the 80s. When he wanted to get to Mr. Calvin to avoid being by an alien invasion. But it turns out that didn't work. I mean, at times you build a doll named Purple Plush. There are times where he actually wasn't the idea of what problems were in the Crazy World universe. For example, in the first part, Shatman is the main villain, so he is not always the main villain. There had been times where he stepped back as one. There in the classic era, this version of Terraformer lasted almost near 30 years. It wasn't until the 80s that it started to revise what his plans were. And trust me, Terraformer has gone through an evolution change throughout the timeline of Crazy World. Because nowadays, villains are not just using a plan to make the next move. Nowadays, villains use their plans for different reasons. Unlike the 1930s or the early 60s, where they were just people who planned stuff ahead to make their next move. Because usually that was the 1930s or early 60s ideas. To use the usual ideas of how to plan a character. And back then, comic books were all about just the hero facing against the villain. Nowadays, you had heroes teaming up to fight against the villain and all the other ideas. Nowadays, thanks to the revival comics, stories of comic book characters doesn't just have to be the hero facing against the bad guy. And that's what Terraformer usually is. He is the usual villain we think of. He is, like many villains, he uses his plan to face it up against Mr. Calvin. In fact, he is so much so that he is currently in the timeline used as a arch nemesis of Mr. Calvin. Or arch rival, if you might. Anyways, that was Crazy Timeline Exploration Episode 3. Bye.